Imagine a movie world without the Shawshank Redemption. It almost sounds like sacrilege, but the film that millions consider to be number one was almost lost to history, never having been born. The biggest skeptic about its creation was Stephen King himself. The author of the original novella believed that his work, Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, was absolutely not cinematic. For King, it was too quiet, an internal story, which could not be adequately transferred to the big screen. Fortunately, young director Frank Darabont didn't think so. He took advantage of King's unique program, Dollar Baby, which allowed beginners to buy the rights to adapt stories for literally $1. This symbolic deal turned out to be a golden ticket. It gave Darabont an invaluable resource, complete creative independence. Without the dictates of a major studio behind him, the crew and actors were free to delve deeply into the material, to explore the characters without commercial pressure. Ironically, even when the film was already finished, Columbia Studios Pictures simply didn't know what to do with it. They didn't understand how to promote a serious prison drama without action. In effect, they treated the future masterpiece as an asset that no one wanted. For a film to become legendary, it's not enough to have a good script. You need a place that breathes history. For The Shawshank Redemption, that place was the prison itself. This is not a pavilion built in Hollywood. This is the real, creepy Ohio State Penitentiary in Mansfield. This place had its own dark aura. The colony was closed just 4 years before filming, and not because of budget savings, but because of the absolutely inhumane conditions of detention. When the film crew first entered it, they felt more than just the cold of an abandoned building. They felt the weight of decades of suffering, pain, and despair that literally soaked these walls. Director Frank Darabont instantly understood this was not just a backdrop. This would be one of the main characters of the film, silent, oppressive, and all-seeing. This atmosphere had a profound effect on the actors. It was not the same as acting on a clean, sterile set. Clancy Brown, who brilliantly played the cruel Captain Hadley, later admitted that the aura of the place was so toxic and sinister that he did not have to act rage. It was the environment that provoked the darkest sides. It was easy for him to imagine himself as a man capable of terrible deeds when he walked the corridors every day where these deeds were a reality. Tim Robbins felt the same way. Imagine playing Andy Dufresne, a man struggling to keep his inner light alive in pitch darkness. Robbins spent hours in a real, tiny cell where real people had lived and died for years before him. The coldness of the concrete, the echoing footsteps in the endless corridors, the smell of mold, all of it was not a set piece, but a reality. It heightened the sense of isolation and helped convey the quiet, unyielding determination that became the heart of his character. But for maximum authenticity, Darabont went even further. For the scenes in the prison yard and the mess hall, he hired more than just extras. Many of the extras were former prisoners who had actually served time at the same prison. When they lined up for roll call or walked to the mess hall, they weren't acting. They were reminiscing about their own past. Their gazes, their hunched walk, the way they held their hands, it was all real. They brought with them the ghosts of the real Shawshank, adding a layer of truth to the film that can't be imitated. And this prison character had its own arc of development. The film spans almost 20 years. How do you show that? The production designers made the walls themselves age. For scenes set in the 1940s, the prison looks relatively well maintained, the paint still fresh. But as time passes, as we move into the 1950s and 1960s, we see it deteriorate. New layers of dirt appear, the paint peels off, rust eats away at the bars. This is not just a technical trick, it is a visual metaphor. The building itself rots from within, just as corruption and brutality eat away at its leadership. The prison ages, tires, and falls apart before the viewer's eyes, paralleling the fates of the people it absorbs. The characters we see on screen are just the tip of the iceberg. The genius of the Shawshank Redemption is that the actors didn't just play roles. They lived hidden lives that we, the audience, only intuitively sense. They created deep, unwritten biographies that explain every silent pause and every look. Take Red, for example. Why is he the guy who can get things? Why does he have such an undeniable but quiet authority in a yard where the law of the jungle reigns? Morgan Freeman didn't play a simple prisoner. He created an entire past for Red. In his vision, Red, before prison, was a numbers man, a key figure in the organized crime of his neighborhood. He was the one who ran the illegal lotteries, the one who had the connections, the one who understood how systems, people, and money worked. That's why he didn't break down in Shawshank. He simply adapted his skills. He is respected not for his physical strength, but for his professionalism, for his code of honor, and for his word. When he speaks to others, his voice carries the experience of a man who has seen it all and led complex operations. This hidden biography has transformed him from a simple storyteller to the heart and conscience of the prison. And Andy Dufresne? He's a real mystery. How did this quiet, intelligent banker, accused of a brutal crime, manage to survive in such an environment? Tim Robbins decided that in order not to go crazy, Andy had to split. He deliberately developed two completely different personalities. The first is the outer Andy. This is the one we see, Red, and even Warden. He is methodical, calm, almost detached. It is the mask of the banker, the analyst, that allows him to calculate his moves, endure humiliation, and plan 20 years ahead. This outer shell is his armor. But there was another, inner personality, the one that no one saw. This was the Andy who was left alone in his cell at night. This was a man torn apart from the inside by rage, despair, longing for a lost life, and the unbearable pain of injustice. It was this inner Andy, full of latent, seething energy, hour after hour, night after night, that was hammering away at the wall with his geological hammer. Robbins realized that outer peace would be impossible without this secret outlet for the inner storm. And finally, Brooks. His story is one of the most tragic in cinema. Actor James Whitmore drew inspiration from his own life, in particular from memories of his father, to understand his character. He saw in Brooks a person who had become completely institutionalized. Prison became his only home, the only structure that gave him meaning. And there was one detail that Whitmore suggested himself that was key. It was the scene where Brooks feeds his little bird, Jake. It wasn't in the script. It was the actor's idea. He felt that Brooks needed someone he could take care of, someone who would depend on him. This bird was his last thread that connected him to humanity and responsibility. When he goes free, he loses not just his camera, he loses his job, his identity, and the only living thing that needed him. It's these unseen backstories that transform the characters of The Shawshank Redemption, from fictional figures to living people whose fates we will always remember. Great films don't just tell stories, they communicate with us in a language that doesn't require words. The Shawshank Redemption is a masterclass in visual storytelling where every frame, every camera angle, is imbued with hidden meaning that deepens our understanding of the characters' inner worlds. Notice how we are introduced to Andy Dufresne, especially early in his imprisonment. The camera rarely gives us a clear, direct view of him. Instead, we are forced to look at him through obstacles. Director Frank Darabont constantly places visual barriers between us and Andy. We see his face, separated by the prison bars. We watch him through the mesh of the fence in the yard. We see his silhouette in the narrow opening of the solitary confinement cell door, or even through the vertical blinds in the warden's office. This is not an accident, nor is it simply an attempt to capture atmospheric. This is a conscious, recurring visual motif. These bars, fences, and doorways are not just prison architecture. They are a metaphor for his psychological state. They symbolize his inner prison. Andy is not confined only by the walls of Shawshank. He is trapped by a false accusation, by the trauma of killing his wife, by the sudden loss of his entire past life. Even when he is not physically in a cell, the cameraman's camera reminds us that he is not free. His spirit, his intellect, his very being are in a cage. This constant visual pressure emphasizes that his main struggle is not only against the prison system, but also against the cage that has been built inside his own mind. But this visual language is not only used to demonstrate imprisonment. It also captures the first, barely perceptible glimpses of freedom. The turning point is certainly the legendary rooftop scene. It is one of the most powerful sequences in the film, and its visual storytelling is impeccable. After Andy helps guard Hadley with his finances, he doesn't ask for money. He asks for beers for his coworkers. And there they are. Look at the composition of the shot. For the first time in a long time, we see these people not through bars or a net. They are out in the open, under a vast, wide sky. The camera zooms out, giving them space, showing them against the backdrop of the distant outside world. They are physically above the oppressive confines of the prison yard. This change in elevation is crucial. They have risen above the prison, if only for a brief moment. And Andy himself? He sits alone, not drinking, just looking at the others with a faint, quiet smile. His satisfaction doesn't come from the beer. It comes from the fact that he was able to give this moment of normalcy, this sip of freedom. In that moment, he regained control. He used his mind, his inner life, to manipulate the system and win a small but deeply human victory. This scene is the birth of his quiet rebellion. It is proof that he can hold on to the part of himself that prison cannot reach. This moment of shared humanity, high above the ground, is a visual prophecy. It heralds his final escape, his triumphant rise above the walls that held him. It is the beginning of the return of his own soul. This whole struggle, this complex visual dance between enslavement and freedom, boils down to one simple phrase. It was more than just a line in the script, it became a guiding principle for the entire crew. On the wall in the production office, where the cast and crew saw it every day, was a note from the director. It contained the essence of the film, its heartbeat, in 5 words. Get busy living or get busy dying. This quote, which we later hear from Red, was not just a motto for the characters. It was an order for the filmmakers. Every decision, every shot, every acting note was evaluated through the prism of this idea. Is this scene about doing life, about finding hope, purpose, and dignity in the darkest place? Or is it about doing dying, about surrendering to the system, about despair and spiritual decline? This philosophy is woven into the very fabric of the film. The oppressive bars? Is it a visualization of get busy dying? The open sky on the roof? Is it the first breath of get busy living? This simple phrase became the compass that ensured that every frame and every note of music pointed to the film's central message. Even in a world defined by walls, the choice between life and death always remains internal. The posters on Andy Dufresne's cell wall. At first glance, they're just contraband. A common expression of a prisoner's desire to see something other than gray concrete. They're a window into the world he's been deprived of. But in reality, these 3 women, who had been replacing each other for decades, were something infinitely greater. They weren't just hiding a hole in the wall. They were a visual diary of the psychological transformation of the man who dug the hole. They were a roadmap for his soul. Let's look at them one by one. This is not a random choice. Each poster is a mirror of who Andy was at that particular moment of his imprisonment. It all began in the 40s. The first was Rita Hayworth. Who was she? She was the quintessence of the glamour of the golden age of Hollywood. Elegant, classic, almost aristocratic in her beauty. She was the ideal of the era that Andy had just left. When he hung that poster, he was still Andy Dufresne, an innocent banker, unjustly convicted. Rita symbolized his past. She was the embodiment of that formality, that old world to which he still clung. The hole behind her was still small, uncertain. It was just an idea, the first quiet act of defiance. She hid a hope that had just been born, the hope of regaining what had been lost. Then the years passed. The 50s arrived. The world changed, and Andy changed with it. Marilyn Monroe appears on the wall. Think about this replacement. It's not just a new face. It's a new ideology. Marilyn is no longer the restrained glamour of the 40s. She is sexuality. She is vulnerability. She is rebellion against old norms. She symbolizes a much more complex, less innocent world. And that's what Andy became. He was no longer the naive rookie. He had survived sisters. He had become a prison financier, a key figure in the warden's corrupt schemes. He had adapted. He had learned to play by the rules of the system, to beat it. The Marilyn on the wall was a symbol of his evolution. He was no longer just an innocent banker. He was becoming something else, a pragmatist, a player. The innocence that Rita had represented had disappeared, evaporated. And the hole behind Marilyn's back? It was growing. The digging had become methodical, a daily routine. It was no longer just an act of hope, it was a long-term, calculated plan. Marilyn represented this long, hard path of metamorphosis. And finally, the 60s. This is the final act. Raquel Welch appears on the wall in the image from the movie. A million years B.C. And this replacement is the most important. This is no longer Hollywood glamour. This is something completely different. She is wearing a fur bikini. She is a primitive woman, a K-woman. This is an image devoid of any civilization. This is pure, unbridled survival instinct. Why her? Because that's what Andy had become. After Tommy's murder, the last bridge to legal release had been burned. His hope in the system had finally died. Andy the banker, Andy the pragmatist, they no longer mattered. To survive and escape, he had to throw off all the masks of civilization. He had to become something primitive. He had to find the animal strength within himself to crawl through 500 yards of dirt and filth. Raquel Welch wasn't just hiding a tunnel. She was a symbol of who one had to become to get through that tunnel. She was permission to go wild. When the warden tears down that poster, he expects to see a wall. But he doesn't just see a hole. He sees a chasm that swallowed the person Andy once was and released the one who was willing to do anything for freedom. So, these posters are not decoration. They are 3 acts of a play. Rita is the innocent past. Marilyn is a complex adaptation in the present. And Raquel is the primordial future, born of despair and the will to live. There's another narrator in the Shawshank Redemption that's easy to miss. He doesn't have a voice, but his presence is felt at every key moment. It's nature itself. The weather in the film isn't just a backdrop, it's a living, breathing character that reflects, comments on, and even participates in the character's fates. It's an emotional barometer of the entire story. For much of the film, the sky above Shawshank is a mirror of what is happening inside. It is heavy, oppressive, mostly gray. The light seems to filter through a layer of dirt before reaching the prison yard. It is a visual metaphor for the condition of the prisoners, a world without hope, where the sun seems afraid to shine. Notice how often the gloomy weather coincides with moral problems or rising danger. When Andy faces a real threat, or when Warden is weaving his corrupt schemes, the sky is not clear and pure. It becomes ominous, the clouds thickening, as if the atmosphere itself is reacting to the toxicity of human actions. Cold rain often accompanies moments of despair, intensifying the sense of isolation and hopelessness. This is not just bad weather, it is moral weather, reflecting the rot within the walls. But the most powerful display of nature, of course, is reserved for the climax, Andy's escape. It's no coincidence that he's escaping during the worst storm in years. It's a cosmic event. The sky literally tears apart, as if in response to Andy's 20-year silent rebellion. It's not just a storm, it's an apocalypse. This storm serves 2 functions. On a practical level, the rumble of thunder masks the sound of Andy's rock breaking the pipe. But on a symbolic level, something much deeper is happening. This is a storm of biblical proportions. It's not just rain. It's a flood that washes away sins. It's not just thunder. It's the voice of retribution, resounding for the crimes of the wardens. And when Andy finally crawls out of the sewer, he doesn't just get free. He goes through a baptism. He stands in this raging downpour, his arms outstretched, and the rain doesn't just wash away the prison filth. It washes away years of humiliation, washes away his prison identity, cleanses him to the core. It's an act of violent but necessary rebirth. The sky that has oppressed him for so long now becomes his accomplice in triumph. Now compare this chaos to the film's final scene, the beach in Zihuatanejo. After 2 hours of visual oppression, gray walls, and raging storms, we suddenly see something dazzling. It's not just a sunny day. It's perfect, flawless calm. The water of the Pacific Ocean is an incredible, impossible blue. The sun doesn't just shine at pores, it's warm and gentle. It is a visual sigh of relief. It is not just a pretty picture for a finale. It is a cinematic depiction of paradise, or at least a state of grace. If the storm was a painful process of rebirth, then this sunlight is the first breath of new life. It is a visual confirmation that the journey is complete, hope is rewarded, and the soul has finally found true, unclouded peace. Nature, which had been their jailer for so long, has finally set them free. Imagine the ending of the Shawshank Redemption. We see Red, having violated his parole, riding a bus. He walks across a long field to a lone tree, finds a letter and money. His last line is spoken off-screen. "I hope I can cross the border. I hope to see my friend and shake his hand." Then we see him, a little scared but determined, walking down the road, hitchhiking. The camera pans up. Blackout. The end. This was exactly how the film's ending should have been. This is how it was written in the script, and this is how Stephen King's novella ended. On a note of uncertainty, on pure hope, but without guarantees. The viewer was left alone with the question, did he succeed? Did they meet? And this openness had its own artistic power. It forced us not just to see hope, but to participate in it, thinking through its fulfillment. The studio, by the way, was not against such an ending. It was restrained, elegant, authors. But director Frank Darabont felt differently. He felt that something was wrong. The thing is, the scene where Red gets on a bus and goes to the Mexican border, the very scene that kicks off this ending, was added at the last minute, after principal photography had finished. It wasn't supposed to be there at all. In the original version, the film simply ended with Red being released, and his fate was left completely unknown. When Darabont looked at the finished material, he realized that after 2.5 hours of emotional hell that the audience had gone through with Red and Andy, such an ending would be cruel. It would feel like a betrayal. The whole point of the film was that hope is a real, effective force. To leave it just an abstract concept, without showing its triumph, would be to devalue all the struggle that we had just seen. But there was another problem. The studio was categorically, simply furiously, against the beach reunion scene. They considered it unnecessary, too Hollywood and sweet. In their opinion, it destroyed the harsh realism of the picture. "Why do we need this scene?" they said. "The film worked anyway. Let the audience decide for themselves." They were afraid that this moment would turn the high drama into a banal melodrama. And here Frank Darabont had to fight. He went against the studio, defending his vision. He argued that the audience, who had lived through the filth, the brutality, the suicide of Brooks, and the murder of Tommy, didn't just want to see this reunion. They deserved it. They earned this release as much as the characters themselves. He insisted that The Shawshank Redemption is not just a story about survival. It's a story about reward. It's a tale about how if you walk through a river of shit, there's a clear ocean waiting for you on the other side. and not showing that Ocean would be deceiving everyone in the room. Darabont won this battle. He shot this seemingly unnecessary scene. And when we look at this moment today, at the dazzling blue sky, at two old friends finally embracing on the endless coast, we do not feel fake. We do not feel Hollywood. We feel the only possible and correct ending. This is not just a meeting of two people. This is the visual embodiment of the very word hope. This is an emotional return, without which the entire previous journey would have lost its meaning. This is that same breath of fresh air after 20 years in a suffocating cell, and we take this breath together with them. There are stories that seem secondary, but without them the whole structure collapses. The story of Brooks Hatlen is the heart of the tragedy of the Shawshank Redemption. His quiet, desperate exit from life is one of the most powerful moments of the film. And it's scary to imagine that this storyline, this character, practically did not exist. In the source, in Stephen King's original novella, Brooks was a barely mentioned footnote. He was just another old prisoner who got out and died. But director Frank Darabont saw something vital in that brief mention. He saw the soul of the film. The studio bosses, of course, were against it. They were watching the stopwatch. They saw a film that was already 2.5 hours long. "Why do we need this long, depressing line about the old man?" they asked. "It slows down the pace. It distracts from the main character, from Andy." They wanted to cut it out, to minimize it. But Darabont was on the verge of death. He understood something they didn't. He knew that the Shawshank Redemption wasn't just an escape story. It was a story about what prison does to the human soul. And Brooks was the perfect, tragic embodiment of that. He was the face of what they call institutionalization. It's a scary word. It means that the prison walls stop being your enemy. They become your friend. They become the only structure in your life. Brooks lived in Shawshank for 50 years. He came there as a young man and became Old Brooks, the prison librarian. That was his identity. That was his life. And freedom? Freedom is not freedom. It's chaos. It's a world that moves too fast, where there are no rules that he knows, where nobody cares about him. Actor James Whitmore, who played Brooks, felt this on an instinctive level. He was the one who suggested one of the most touching details: Jake's baby bird. He understood that Brooks needed more than just a routine. He needed someone to care for. The library and this bird were his purpose, his meaning. And when he goes free, he loses more than just his camera. He loses everything. He becomes a nobody. His famous letter is the cry of a man who is afraid. "I am tired of being afraid," he writes. And his suicide is not an act of despair. It is his only way to stop the fear, the only control he has left. But Darabont didn't just defend this line for the sake of tragedy. He defended it because without Brooks, Red's story loses 90% of its power. Think about it. When Red is released a decade later, what happens to him? He follows the exact same path Brooks took. He lives in the same room. He works the same job, packing groceries. He stands in front of the same gun display. He feels the same fear, the same loneliness, the same world moving too fast. He stands on the edge of the same abyss that Brooks fell into. And we, the audience, know how deep that abyss is only because we saw Brooks die in it. Do life or do death? Brooks chose dying. He showed us what that path looks like. And when Red stands at the same crossroads, he finds the strength to make a different choice, Andy's choice. He decides to do life. Without Brooks' tragic fate, Red's decision would have been just a nice ending. But thanks to Brooks, his choice becomes an act of incredible courage. It's not just a trip to see a friend. It's a victory over the same fate that destroyed his friend. Brooks Hatlen had to die so that we could understand what it really means to live. Warden Samuel Norton. He's not just a villain. He's the embodiment of cold, methodical, smug cruelty. A man who holds a Bible in one hand and clutches the fates of his prisoners in the other. He talks about salvation and discipline, but his eyes are completely blank. He's one of the most memorable cinematic villains, so perfectly written that it seems almost allegorical. But where does such a character come from? Is it just a successful invention of the screenwriter? Pure fantasy of Stephen King? No. The scariest thing about Chief Norton is that he's not fictional. He's written off from reality. The very title of the film, The Shawshank Redemption, is actually an inaccurate translation. In the original, the film is called The Shawshank Redemption, and we, the audience, tend to think that this redemption is the same iconic scene. Andy Dufresne in the rain, hands to the sky, free. This is his victory. But that's not the case. What Andy did was escape. It was revenge. It was a brilliant restoration of justice. But his true redemption was a whole other process, one that happened slowly, over 20 years, and it had nothing to do with the tunnel behind the poster. When Andy arrived at Shawshank, he was a ghost, a man who had lost everything, innocent but condemned. His redemption didn't begin when he picked up a geological hammer. It began when he picked up a pen to write a letter. His true redemption is the Brooks Hatlen Library. It is a quiet, stubborn, years-long war he waged not for his own freedom, but for the shred of humanity within these walls. He wrote letters, week after week, year after year, until he broke the system. He transformed a closet of moldy books into the finest prison library in New England. For what? To give people a tool for building in a place designed to break people. He taught the prisoners. He helped Tommy get his degree. And of course, he turned on that operatic aria. He locked the door, risking everything to give thousands of prisoners 2 minutes of a beauty that the prison could neither understand nor touch. Andy's redemption is not about saving himself. It's about saving the very idea of saving others. He left a legacy. He changed the very air the prisoners breathed. He proved that doing life is possible even in Shawshank. It was his quiet, inner victory. But even that isn't the film's main redemption story. The main story belongs to Red. Red is the only guilty man in Shawshank, as he says, and he's the one who needs real redemption, not just an excuse. For decades, we've seen him at parole hearings, and every time he plays the part. He says the cliché, "I've been rehabilitated without a doubt. I can honestly say I've changed." He tells the system what he thinks it wants to hear, and every time he gets a deny stamp, because that's a lie. He's not rehabilitated. He's just adapted. And so, the final hearing. He's old. He's institutionalized. He's tired. He's got no game left. And when he's asked the same question, he finally stops lying. To himself and to them. He doesn't ask. He doesn't make excuses. He looks at his past. At that stupid little guy who committed that terrible crime. And for the first time accepts it. He admits that he can't change anything, and he doesn't care about their rehabilitated status. "It's just a false word," he says. And in that moment of absolute, painful honesty, he is free. Even before they stamp approved. His redemption doesn't happen when the gates open. It happens in that stifling room when he finally finds the strength to be honest. As director Frank Darabont himself said, "Redemption is the salvation of what matters inside you." For Andy, it was his purpose, his intellect, and his hope. For Red, it was his truth and his soul. When actor Bob Gunton was preparing for this role, he didn't just learn the line. He immersed himself in the history of the American penitentiary system. And there, among the yellowed archives, he found it, his prototype. The man's name is irrelevant, but his story mirrors Norton's. He was a real-life prison official who ran one of the facilities in the 1950s. And like Norton, he built his public image on 2 pillars, unwavering discipline and a deep, ostentatious religiosity. In public, he was the embodiment of morality. He delivered speeches about reform, about the power of prayer, about the chance of salvation for every prisoner through hard work and faith in God. His office, like Norton's, was hung with religious quotations. He was a respected man in the local community, a model of Christian virtue. But it was just a mask. It was a facade that hid a deep, systemic rot. While this real-life prison warden was quoting the Bible, he was running a massive corruption scheme. He was using prisoners not for correction, but as personal, free labor. This was slavery in the 20th century. According to the documents, these prisoners were supposedly working on improvement of the territory. In reality, they were building and repairing private houses for the boss and his friends. They were fulfilling personal orders. Bob Gunton said that this official, for example, forced prisoners to make him expensive custom-made furniture, which he then sold. He stole from the system. He stole from the prisoners. He stole from the state. His corrective labor program was exactly the same fiction as the Inside Out program in the movie A Cover for Personal Enrichment. In the end, this true story ended as it should have. The official was exposed. He was tried and convicted for corruption, embezzlement of public funds, and abuse of power. His public image as a righteous man crumbled to dust. Bob Gunton took this story and breathed it into Norton. That's why Chief Warden's hypocrisy feels so real, so venomous. When Norton tells Andy, "Salvation lies within," and hands him a Bible, it's not just irony. It's a direct reference to a real person who used the holy book as a tool of manipulation and cover for his crimes. When we see the embroidered sign on the wall, "His judgment is near and will not delay," we understand that this is not just decoration. It's the psychological defense of a corrupt person who is desperately trying to convince himself that he is right. This real-life background transforms Norton from a typical bad guy into something much more sinister. He is a symbol of institutionalized evil, an evil that wears a tie, says the right words, and hides its greed behind paragraphs of law and quotes from the Holy Scripture. The Shawshank Redemption shows us that the most dangerous monsters are not those who openly roar and show their fangs, but those who smile, quote the Bible, and quietly sign another corrupt document. The very title of the film, The Shawshank Redemption, is actually an inaccurate translation. In the original, the film is called The Shawshank Redemption, and we, the audience, are inclined to think that this redemption is the same iconic scene. Andy Dufresne in the rain, hands to the sky, free. This is his victory. But that's not the case. What Andy did was escape. It was revenge. It was a brilliant restoration of justice. But his true redemption was a whole other process, one that happened slowly, over 20 years, and it had nothing to do with the tunnel behind the poster. When Andy arrived at Shawshank, he was a ghost, a man who had lost everything, innocent but condemned. His redemption didn't begin when he picked up a geological hammer. It began when he picked up a pen to write a letter. His true redemption is the Brooks Hatlen Library. It is a quiet, stubborn, years-long war he waged not for his own freedom, but for the shred of humanity within these walls. He wrote letters, week after week, year after year, until he broke the system. He transformed a closet of moldy books into the finest prison library in New England. For what? To give people a tool for building in a place designed to break people. He taught the prisoners. He helped Tommy get his degree. And of course, he turned on that operatic aria. He locked the door, risking everything to give thousands of prisoners 2 minutes of a beauty that the prison could neither understand nor touch. Andy's redemption is not about saving himself. It's about saving the very idea of saving others. He left a legacy. He changed the very air the prisoners breathed. He proved that doing life is possible even in Shawshank. It was his quiet, inner victory. But even that isn't the film's main redemption story. The main story belongs to Red. Red is the only guilty man in Shawshank, as he says, and he's the one who needs real redemption, not just an excuse. For decades, we've seen him at parole hearings, and every time he plays the part. He says the cliché, "I've been rehabilitated without a doubt. I can honestly say I've changed. He tells the system what he thinks it wants to hear, and every time he gets a deny stamp, because that's a lie. He's not rehabilitated. He's just adapted. And so, the final hearing. He's old. He's institutionalized. He's tired. He's got no game left. And when he's asked the same question, he finally stops lying. To himself and to them. He doesn't ask. He doesn't make excuses. He looks at his past. At that stupid little guy who committed that terrible crime. And for the first time accepts it. He admits that he can't change anything, and he doesn't care about their rehabilitated status. It's just a false word, he says. And in that moment of absolute, painful honesty, he is free. Even before they stamp approved, his redemption doesn't happen when the gates open. It happens in that stifling room when he finally finds the strength to be honest. As director Frank Darabont himself said, redemption is the salvation of what matters inside you. For Andy, it was his purpose, his intellect, and his hope. For Red, it was his truth and his soul. The same final scene. The blinding sun. The endless blue ocean. Two old friends slowly walking towards each other. It's pure earned catharsis. It's the same sigh of relief we've been waiting for 2.5 hours. Now imagine that this scene doesn't exist. The studio bosses were adamantly against it. They thought the beach reunion was too much. Too sweet, too sentimental, too Hollywood. They were afraid it would ruin the whole gritty, realistic tone of the film. They wanted to end on a note of uncertainty, Red riding on a bus, full of hope but no guarantees. But director Frank Darabont fought a real battle for this ending. He was convinced that after all the hell he had put the audience through, after the brutality of Sisters, after Tommy's murder, after Brooke's suicide, he simply had to show that hope was not in vain. This was not about sentimentality. This was about justice. This was about proving that hope is not just an abstract idea, but a real force that leads to a real result. And there's an amazing production fact associated with this scene. It was shot first. It was literally the first day of filming for Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman together on set. Think about it. They hadn't yet gone through the decade of Shawshank Redemption together. They hadn't yet built that legendary on-screen chemistry, that deep, silent friendship that became the heart of the film. That's why there's such a unique, barely perceptible quality to this scene. When they hug, there's a faint awkwardness, almost a sense of uncertainty. This isn't just a meeting of two best friends. This is a meeting of two people who, in fact, barely know each other, but at the same time feel an incredible, fateful connection. This production accident fits the plot perfectly. It's a meeting of two men who know each other better than anyone else, but at the same time, they see each other for the first time as new, free people, in a completely new world. The importance of this moment was best summed up by Morgan Freeman himself. He noted that if the film had ended without this meeting, it would have been a story of endless longing. But thanks to the ending on the beach, it became a story of healing. We're talking about the actors, the script, the camera. But there's another, invisible but vital narrator in The Shawshank Redemption. It's the music. Thomas Newman's soundtrack is not just a backdrop. It's the inner monologue of the entire prison. It's the soundscape of the souls locked inside. Listen carefully at the beginning of the film. What kind of music greets us? It is cold. It is minimalist, mechanical, often just a few lonely, disturbing piano notes. It is not a melody. It is the sonic embodiment of routine. It is the sound of prison bars closing. It is the echo of footsteps in an empty corridor. It is the sound of identical days forming identical years. The music at the beginning itself seems institutionalized, devoid of hope, emotion, and life. It perfectly conveys this oppressive, claustrophobic state, the slow dying of the spirit. But then Andy appears, and as his influence, his quiet, unyielding will, begins to seep into the walls, a miracle happens to the music. It begins to breathe. Almost imperceptibly, step by step, Newman introduces warmth into the score. We begin to hear strings. At first faintly, but then more and more confidently. The music seems to expand, to fill with air, just as Andy expands the library. It stops being about cold stone and starts being about the indomitable human spirit. The soundtrack to the rooftop scene is not just a triumph. It is the sound of liberation. It is the first deep breath that the prisoners, and we with them, take in the entire film. The music stops being mechanical and becomes human. But Newman's genius is in the details. Take Brooks' tragedy. The music that accompanies his release is not just sadness. It's disorientation. It's the sound of pure, undisguised panic. As he steps out into the free world, the melody becomes fast, nervous, chaotic. It perfectly captures his inner state, his inability to comprehend a world that moves too fast. The music tells us that this man is lost, even before he writes his farewell letter. It's a theme of quiet, tragic disintegration. And, of course, opera. This incredible act of defiance. It's the moment when music literally becomes the plot. It doesn't just support the scene, it is the scene. When Andy locks the door and turns the volume up, he doesn't just play a record. He uses music as a weapon. Like a sonic battering ram against the despair of Shawshank Redemption. The voices of two Italian singers soar over the prison yard. The prisoners stop. They don't understand a word. They don't need to. They understand the feeling. It's the sound of something so grand, so beautiful, and so free that the gray walls can't contain it. It's the sound of that part of you that the prison can't reach. For 2 minutes, the music broke down the walls and reminded everyone what it means to be human. It's the most powerful, audible expression of hope ever captured on film. From the cold, lonely piano at the beginning to the boundless warmth of the orchestra on the beach in Zihuatanejo, the music follows its own path of redemption, parallel to the characters. It leads us by the hand, telling us what words cannot. Today we take it for granted. The Shawshank Redemption is the #1 movie, the best movie by millions. But in 1994, when it came out, the world simply ignored it. It was a box office flop. A crushing, unquestionable flop. The theaters were empty. The studio lost money. The critics were subdued. It seemed destined for oblivion. You have to understand the context. 1994 was perhaps one of the greatest years in the history of cinema. It was the year Quentin Tarantino blew up the world with his Pulp Fiction. Bold, stylish, postmodern. It was the year Forrest Gump became a cultural phenomenon, winning awards and hearts. Against the backdrop of these loud, innovative, vibrant blockbusters, where did The Shawshank Redemption go? There was simply no room for a quiet, melancholic prison drama that lasted almost 2.5 hours and didn't have a single A-list star. The film disappeared from the radar. But then a miracle happened. It had a name, cable television, specifically the channel TNT. They bought the rights to show it and started spinning it over and over and over. And there, in the silence of living rooms, without the noise of advertising, people finally saw it. It was the perfect movie for home viewing. Its leisurely pace, its deep emotional connection, it all worked perfectly. A slow but unstoppable chain reaction began. It was the same. Word of mouth, in its purest form. Have you seen this movie? You have to see it. Tim Robbins himself called the process poetic. There's a perfect irony in this. A film about a man who spent 20 years quietly, methodically, and patiently chiseling away at a wall has itself repeated that path. It didn't explode. It slowly, methodically, and patiently made its way into the hearts of millions. Its escape from oblivion lasted for years. By the late 90s, Thanks to videotapes and television, the film that had flopped at the box office had risen to the top of the IMDb rankings. And it remains there to this day. It's not just a success. It's proof that true quality, like true hope, will always find its way. What happens to a place that for decades was a symbol of pain and suffering, and then became the setting for one of the greatest stories of hope? After the film crew left Ohio State Penitentiary, the real Shawshank could simply fall into disrepair, becoming a forgotten ghost that everyone would rather demolish. But the power of cinema proved stronger than the power of concrete and rust. A miracle happened. The building went through its own, real-life arch of redemption. Today, this place is no longer a symbol of horror. It is a place of pilgrimage. Every year, more than 100,000 people from all over the world voluntarily pass through the same gates where Andy Dufresne was once forced. They do not come to feel fear. They come to touch the legend. They wander the same corridors, stand in the same prison yard, peer into Andy's tiny cell. They see Warden Norton's office, where he met his inglorious end, and even the same hole in the wall that led to freedom. And this incredible transformation has not only changed the fate of the building, it has breathed new life into an entire region. The small, once oppressed towns around Mansfield, which for decades looked at this prison with fear, now live because of it. A whole tourist route called the Shawshank Redemption Trail was created. It takes fans through all the key locations from the film, from the bank where Andy exposed the warden's corruption to the very field where Red found the letter under the volcanic glass. This trail has revived the local economy. Hotels, restaurants, souvenir shops, they all owe their existence to the film, which once flopped at the box office. This is the ultimate irony. The prison, which in the film was a symbol of corruption, decay, and broken destinies, in real life has become a source of prosperity, inspiration, and life. The building designed to break the human spirit now exists solely to lift it. It is no longer a prison. It is a living monument to unbreakable resilience. There is another character in the Shawshank Redemption that we never see, but without whom the story is impossible. It is the voice of Red. Morgan Freeman's voice is not just a narrator explaining events. It is the emotional compass of the entire film, carrying the weight of decades lived. But that voice might not have been there. Director Frank Darabont was initially desperately resistant to the idea of voiceover. He feared it would be a crutch, that it was a shortcut to a weak script that couldn't tell the story visually. But he was wrong, because it is not just a voice. It is the sound of institutionalization itself. It is the weariness accumulated over years. It is wisdom bought at an incredible price. Freeman's tone has it all: pain, regret, a barely perceptible irony. But most importantly, beneath all this ash, hope simmers. It is this weary, but indomitable voice that ties the whole story together. It doesn't just tell us about hope. It is its sound. It gives the film not just structure but intimacy, transforming us from observers into participants in Red's journey.